I'm one of those guys who are optimistic India will reach the target of 500 gigawatt of renewable energy by 2030, or what comes to the same thing, that 50% of electricity from renewable sources by the same date. But I'm also one of those guys who believe that having given the orders, the government should sit back and bet more on economic principles. India is a champion in climate issues. It is leading rather than being led. But having reached here, the bureaucracy needs to now believe that it will give less orders and allow the market to pick up the slack. I mean, come along. We are so good on jugaad, and environmental targets need us to use that jugaad best. We just had COP27, and whether it's a cop out, that the international pundits will say. But for India, we have a lot to be interested, and that is what we'll be looking at this edition of On Point. Remember, it was the incentives which got us the Supreme Court orders implementation of 1998 and 2002. Now, what did that order say? That order said government buses had to switch to CNG. But who were the first to move to CNG? It was the auto rickshaw drivers. So it was the incentives that was working. Speaking in Parliament, the then Petroleum Minister Mr. Ram Nayak said the LNG demand generated by the light motor vehicles, that's auto rickshaws, has swelled also because of the present pricing advantage in using CNG. As against a price of rupees 28.75 per litre of petrol, CNG is priced at rupees 12.21 per kilogram. The cost per kilometer comes to just 49 paisa in case of CNG, as against rupees 1.60 in the case of petrol. Now, obviously, this is something which is made necessary for IGL to make large investments for setting up its CNG stations, and as on date, these distortions merit rationalization. What doesn't work? When there are no incentives, as in the case of solar rooftop renewables. Now, tell me, how many private homes in Delhi have you seen using solar rooftops? And that's the same all over India. The target across India is very low, just 40 gigawatt out of 300 gigawatt for solar. But even that is not working. What is the problem? The problem is that the incentives that the government have and that the private parties have are not aligned. And when that does not align, you do not get a program working. Remember again what worked for the auto rickshaw drivers in Delhi. That is what we need to understand.
While the public has to wait in lines for hours to get CNG, they also seem relieved at the lower prices. The time lost waiting in lines outside CNG stations seems to be a small price for the money they end up saving.
पेट्रोल पर चलानी पड़ती है तो पेट्रोल में गुजारा नहीं होता, वो महंगा पड़ता है, सवारी पैसे नहीं देती.
खुदा के लिए खुदा का खौफ करें, कोई हमें जो है ना कोई रोटी कमाने दे, कोई CNG दें.
How do these incentives work? That leads us to some basic economics, that of the Coase theorem. Ronald Coase, the 1991 winner of the Nobel Prize in Economics, wrote very few papers, about a dozen odd, but each of them were significant. One of those, The Nature of the Firm, we'll discuss some other day. Today, we pick up his other paper, The Problem of Social Cost. Now, we talked about incentives. And what did he say? He said these incentives can be created for a trade in an externality provided two things happen. That the property rights are clear between those who are bargaining and the transaction costs are low. If that happens, then an efficient bargain on an externality can happen between two parties. And that is a very powerful result in economics. So, you want your neighborhood free of pollution. What will you do? you will do a deal with the man who is either pouring oil or chemicals or dirty water into your neighborhood. Now, you will do a deal to pay him the cost of the pollutants and a little bit extra to ensure that the deal works. In the rooftop solar, who is one bargaining with? The government, the DISCOMs. Take a look at this video.
रूफटॉप सोलर लगाने के बाद कुछ जरूरी जानकारी पोर्टल पर भरनी है और नेट मीटर लगवाना है। इसके बाद अपना बैंक अकाउंट डिटेल पोर्टल पर देना है और 30 दिनों के अंदर बैंक खाते में सब्सिडी मिल जाएगी।
Did anybody ever bargain and win an argument against the government? Remember, you're talking about maintaining property rights in India, like a developing country where that becomes a difficult issue to settle. Given that, and the fact that the transaction cost of that bargain is going to be high, where is the incentive to move to solar power versus conventional energy? Add to it another layer of problem, which is that you have to now push the excess solar energy into the grid. So, altogether, where does the incentive to trade in solar come from? If there is no market, where will the bargains come from? Indians love their market, but our bureaucracy, and I don't want to use the word babus, hate providing them markets. And that is a problem, because while there are very good uses for top-down orders, those miss plenty of good megawatts of deals. And without markets, money to finance the transition will not be coming. A 13-year-old target of providing $100 billion to the developing countries for financing renewable energy has still not been met. Now look at this report from Bloomberg. It notes that for every $20 of high-risk, low-return state and multilateral funding provides or mobilizes another $80 of private investment. What's the picture in practice? The ratio is about the opposite. $66 billion of public climate finance in 2019 put in just 14.4 billion of private money into action. Let's look at another disaster. This is of open access. Now, the open access promised market-led reform in the Electricity Act of 2003. Now, what did it say? That if I need more than 1 megawatt of power, I should be able to buy it from anyone rather than just having to depend on the assigned distributor. In so many years, since 2003, what has been the progress on it? Hardly anything. No DISCOM wants a market where its most productive consumers go off. Again, what did Coase say? That supposing if a rancher was raising cattle and that cattle was harming the farm next door, running riot across the farm, then the farmer and the rancher will come to an agreement which will be beneficial for them. As I wrote in my column last week, without market signals, states don't want to rush in. The center has to do all the heavy lifting. If a company today offers green electricity and goes into open access using just market principles of free access, where do you think will be the problem? Nothing. And if there is not going to be any such problem, then Power Minister Mr. R.K. Singh and his team will not need to come up with schemes like the renewable power obligation. Now, those are good ones, but again, those are top-down orders. They do not understand or use the efficiency of the markets which Indians are so good at. Remember, I said jugaad. There's lots of other things that Indians can do, and they are on the right side of the climate agenda. So why not use it? Why are sales of electric vehicles jumping up? Because people like the deal. Similarly, in other areas of green, people are coming up with innovations. Now, some of them, like this, are shady, but we can live with that. What Mr. Singh and his team need to understand is the reason why the auto rickshaw drivers in 2002 jumped to CNG. Depends on the market, that will create the money for this change. Remember, the renewable power energy change that India is doing is probably the biggest ever change in this globe. The entire world will be watching because of the scale of the change, and to make it successful, we need to understand and depend on the power of the markets. That's all for today from On Point. Thank you for watching.